I think we're ready to get started here. Thank you all for being here. I want to, on the agenda, first of all, is there any bill introductions from the committee? Or anybody here? Okay, thank you. I'm going to do a little change in the agenda to kind of help some people out here. So we're going to have the discussion and action on budgets first. So if you can pick up your capers. And committee, was there any questions on that? We'll be in discussion right now, so. Surely we can find 4 or 5 things in here for Alan, could we not? Got one. Senator Pittman.
Honestly, I'd just like to make a motion to approve the 24-25 budget as presented and recommended by the governor.
Got a motion. Do we have a second? Got a second by Senator Dietrich. Any discussion? Senator Gossage.
It's not particular about the budget, Mr. Chair, but just a question from a couple of people that came to my office yesterday who thought that now 3 was the only option. Like if you came in, that 3 is the only option. But when I came in 4 years ago, they gave me an opportunity to do 1, 2, or 3. Could we just talk about that after we vote, perhaps?
Okay, maybe that's something we can visit, Senator,
Yes.
with Alan afterwards.
Okay.
Is there any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Next on the agenda is Office of State Treasurer. Did anyone have any question or any discussion on that one or any recommendations? Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Say we move to accept the governor's recommendation, except on number 3 and 4, where she has adjustments on the LAVT and the STAR bonds, that we reviewed those more at Omnibus. That would be my motion.
That's your motion. Okay, do we have a second to that? Got a second by Senator Gossage. Now we're ready for discussion. Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Was that to move the LAVTR recommendation and the STAR bond recommendation to omnibus? Is that what that motion was? I just want to double check that.
Yes, for just some further review.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Okay, and the third item is Pooled Money Investment Board. These budgets are pretty cut and dry, so. Any questions anybody would want to bring up, or I'd entertain a motion there.
I move that we pass the budget on Pooled Money Investment Board as presented to committee.
As recommended by the governor. Is that the wording we want to use to that? Okay. Is that your motion?
As recommended by the governor.
That's it. Okay. Is there a second to that? Second by Senator Pittman. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Thank you very much. That get us moving on that. So now we'll go back to a hearing on Senate Bill 356 that is requiring the per diem amounts, expenses, and funds for examination to be reasonable and establishing a tiered fee structure for examination of insurance companies and societies based on gross premiums. So we have a bill overview by Eileen Mai Assistant Revisor, Kansas Revisor of Statutes. Eileen, welcome to committee. Are you the one doing this? Huh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee. Senate Bill 356, again, would require per diem amounts, expenses, and funding for examinations be reasonable and would establish a tiered fee structure for examinations of insurance companies and societies based on gross premiums received. So Senate Bill 356 amends KSA 40-223 pertaining to expenses relating to the examination of insurance companies. And under current law, any person who makes an examination of an insurance company may receive a per diem amount set by the commissioner as full compensation for the person's services. And this payment includes travel time to and from the place where the examination is being conducted, as well as the examiner's time in actually conducting the examination. So 356 would place a reasonability requirement on the per diem amount and that the examiner would receive, and a reasonability limitation on the payment for necessary and actual expenses for travel and subsistence paid to the examiner. Additionally, under current law, the insurance company is responsible for all expenses incurred during the examination, and this bill stipulates that those expenses for outside consulting and the amount to fund the purchase, maintenance, and enhancement of equipment and software for the examinations must also be reasonable. Finally, Senate Bill 356 would establish a tiered fee structure for examinations that is based on gross premiums that the insurance company receives. Currently, only 2 tiers exist. 356 would establish 5 additional tiers, which would allow the insurance company to better, I guess the fee would better reflect the size of the insurance company's examination and complexity thereof. Lastly, the bill requires that the amount paid to conduct a market regulation examination and the amount charged to fund the purchase, maintenance, and enhancement of equipment be reasonable and not exceed $25,000. And with that, I can stand for questions.
Committee, do we have any questions? Okay. Senator Pittman.
Eileen, thank you. Is there anywhere else in statute that you know of, maybe you don't, that we do this kind of reasonable check on expenses and payments like that?
This is the first time I've actually seen it. Legally, in my personal opinion, legally reasonable rather, is kind of a wiggle word that there's not really a definition of. So I haven't seen it. I don't like to use it personally when I do things, but this was a request from the department.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Have any other questions for Eileen? Okay. Thank you, Eileen. Next, we have for proponents oral, Eric Turek, Director of Government and Public Affairs, Kansas Insurance Department. Eric, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. We appreciate, the Kansas Insurance Department appreciates the opportunity to introduce Senate Bill 356 and the opportunity to provide proponent testimony. You have our written testimony, and I won't be reading from that directly. I will be referencing that. I will be referencing that at one point. I do want to start by underscoring one of the prime functions of any insurance department across the country. It's primarily departments primarily exist to ensure that insurance companies remain solvent. So when policyholders submit claims or file claims to insurance companies, those companies have the ability to pay those claims. And departments ensure solvency through the financial examination process. In Kansas, we conduct those financial examinations roughly every 4 years in every one of our domestic insurers. And I will say the bill pertains to the cost of these financial examinations. In current law, there is the actual cost of the examination that's incurred by the department. We invoice that to the companies, except for what we use externally. And so there are times when we do have to use external services. I will say that many insurance departments across the country have difficulty hiring examiners with the appropriate accreditation credentials. And so really just to make sure that we are in check with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, we do contract out the necessary expertise. As the revisor stated, there are caps to the amount that we can charge. If a company writes less than $200 million in annual gross premium, the maximum amount that the department can invoice or charge to an insurer is $50,000. And if they write over that threshold, the maximum amount that the department can charge is $500,000. Otherwise, all the expenses that are incurred by the department, there is no cap. And that is very common across the country. Commissioner Schmidt meets with the domestic insurers across the state at least once every year, and something that we have heard repeatedly is a call for an overall cap. The cap just for external services, it's not the whole picture, and so we've proposed a 7-tiered system to really provide not only the regulatory certainty, but to allow insurers to budget appropriately during that 3 to 5 year period where they're examined. On the second page of our testimony, you will see the proposed caps and the annual gross premium written. The main impetus behind this was to, well, naturally, a smaller insurer, the cost of their financial examination will naturally be smaller, and the larger insurer will naturally the cost of their exam will be greater. And so we have devised this schedule to with these maximum caps to correlate with the amount of annual gross premium that they write. Mr. Chairman, I think I've gone into a little bit of detail, and I'd be happy to clarify any questions if there are any.
Committee, we got Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Eric, for being here. Always appreciate you. Likewise, I talked to Eileen right before this, as you heard. I think the tiered cap system is good for certainty for these different insurers, and it sounds like they're calling for some kind of at least way to budget this process so they understand what's going on, and at least they know that. Obviously, in a few years, maybe those caps will go up and down. We have no idea. That's kind of a vacuum for us because we don't know how much these things cost for these, but we're relying on your expertise to do that. The only issue seems to me that nowhere in statute do we talk about reasonable cost for expenses and these types of things, and honestly, I wouldn't want to put something like that because it's so subjective. So are you open to some other kind of language that might be better?
Sure, absolutely. Two things I'll mention. One, the overall cap, I will mention that if the cost of the exam goes beyond the proposed cap for these companies that fit in these brackets, the department will assume that cost, as we do already with the external services. I will say I think the impetus behind the reasonable being included there is to ensure that insurers aren't having to pay for first-class plane tickets or anything like that. We just really want to make sure that these are reasonable. I'd be happy to talk to you a little bit more about the rationale behind that, and if the committee wishes to remove that, that would be within your purview.
Committee, we have any other questions? Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm seeing that Marley brought in testimony regarding the property and casualty. Were there any other insurance companies that came forward and said we support this, or our opponents?
I will say that we have worked mostly with CAPSIC to ensure that these are an appropriate schedule of sorts. I will tell you, we've worked with insurers all across the spectrum, lots of different lines of insurance to ensure that not only the smaller companies, but also the larger companies are okay with this. And I will point out additionally the largest domestics, those costs, obviously costs vary depending on asset structure, line of insurance, types of products. And so this really does work for all insurers in the state.
And I see there are no opponents, so I'm assuming that you reached out to everybody about this. Mm-hmm. And so this would be their total cost, not just that $25,000 cap on, the external group, but their total cost.
Yep, a total overall cost incurred by the department and the services that we contract out. And again, whatever, they're probably will be a company or multiple companies that where their cost of their examination will go beyond these thresholds, but the department will assume these costs, those costs.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, we have any other questions? Senator Dietrich?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. This isn't necessarily a question, just a thought about the term reasonable. So in the law, are we saying that that's not typically used? Because it's hard to define. And if the answer is yes, would another term, because I know what you're trying to get at, that it not be unusual or extraordinary or excessive, could the term standard be used? You know, it's because that is in the law and it's defined, and you have a ceiling and a floor. So just a thought, I'm just putting that out there just for consideration because I do understand what you're trying to do. And it would be good if we could provide some guidance on that statutorily. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Chair, I can definitely bring those concerns, and now that two members of the committee have brought up this concern, I can definitely bring that back to the department and let the committee know how we feel about that change.
Any other questions? Got one right here. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to follow up on the senator's question, so right now, currently, without the word reasonable in there, there's no upper limit on the amount or no other guardrail or guideline or limit or anything. Is that where we are?
So beyond the cap for external services that the department can charge to the insurers, there's no other guideline that I'm aware of that would that fits in line with what reasonable would that we intend to add there.
So the intent is to put some parameters and some guardrails that it has to be reasonable. And maybe this is a question for the revisor. If someone were to challenge the reasonableness of the statute, what would they do? Would it be a legislative issue to take up, or?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure I understand the question. They would be challenging the reasonableness of the statute or the reasonableness of the charge?
The reasonableness of the charge, of the amount of the charge.
I am not a trial attorney. I am a legislative attorney. So with that having been said, what I would assume would happen would be, you know, if it went to court, because it would have to be challenged in court, they would kind of take a listing or, you know, of insurance companies that same size and how much those examinations and expenses would cost those companies of the same approximate size. But again, that would be totally hypothetical and based on just the knowledge I have, which may or may not be very much in this case at all.
Well, and then outside the legislature, then yes, if you are a practitioner and you want to challenge the reasonableness, I suppose the defendant that you would be pursuing in court would be, well, I'm not going to, it would be either be the department for having charged an amount that's not reasonable, and that would then be up to the attorneys to decide and bring evidence about what's reasonable or what's not. So, or perhaps if the industry finds in practice that it's ending up that it's not reasonable, then they come back to the legislature and ask for some other guardrail. But I understand the intent here, and it's putting some guardrails in place where now currently none exist. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions, committee? I have one, maybe two here. Eric, I was wondering on the National Association, how often do they review, you know, to what how often do they recommend? Is that an annual basis, or how do they do that?
You're asking how often the NAIC requires these examinations to take place?
Well, when it says recommended by the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, how often do they review that? How often does that number change?
Yeah, you're referring to the bottom part of the first page of our testimony, is that right?
I'm kind of in the middle part, in section 1, like 15, 16.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, are you referring to our testimony or the bill? Thank you. And which page is that?
It starts in at line 15, yeah.
You know, that's a great question, Mr. Vice Chair. I can get you an answer for that. I don't have that right now, but I can get you that.
Okay. And the other part of that might be a little history as to what those charges have been. I could see New York versus Kansas, you know, maybe being okay, but something because of unforeseen reasons that could get upside down. So that was just my thought I had on that, Eric. So I'm talking about when we set the fees by the recommendation of the National Association, that we shall not exceed that. Would there ever be a time that that might go the other direction, you know, because of population size or, I'm just worried about setting that level. How often does that get looked at? And what if kind of thing? A little history to when they've changed and how often they change.
Sure, I can make sure to get you that. You know, and I do think that, great point, and I do think that I will definitely be sure to get you that information, Mr. Vice Chair, but I do want to, you know, really underscore the prime component of the bill, because, I mean, that part that you already mentioned is already in current law, but, you know, the prime focus of the bill is the new caps that we're establishing here. Yeah.
Is there any other questions, committee? Senator Bettman.
Sorry, and I know we're not harping on this reasonable thing. It's just that it's a new thing, putting in the statute makes me worried to introduce kind of a gray area. Does the department not already have guidelines for expenses that they can enforce? Is that not in place right now?
You know, that is a great question. In terms of the exact guardrails of what we can invoice and what we can't invoice beyond this particular statute, I don't have the answer for that right now, but I can get you more information about that and reasonable and all of our justifications for the inclusion of that language.
I think that's just, we can figure this out. It's just,
Yeah.
would like to know a little bit more about that. And I think once we do that, I'm pretty much a go on this,
Yeah.
okay?
Great.
Eileen, okay. Is there any other questions, committee? Senator Olson, you got any questions today? Okay. All right. Okay, if there's no other questions, Eric, thank you very much. Next, we have Marley Carpenter on behalf of the Kansas Association of Property and Casualty Insurance Companies. Marley, welcome to committee.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. I am Marley Carpenter here on behalf of the Kansas Association of Property and Casualty Insurance Companies, which is the state trade association for domestic property and casualty insurance companies in the state. We are the group that the department does look at for these exams, and we very much appreciate the commissioner meeting with the domestic companies on a yearly basis and listening to our concerns on this. And so instead of having the fees for the department and then a cap, we would like one cap, and this legislation accomplishes that. We also ask for several additional tiers, and we very much appreciate the department working with us on the additional tiers and making sure that it does fit the companies in the state. Our companies want a budget, and this makes it much more easy to budget for those exams that are very necessary and very crucial to how we do our business. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions. Hopefully, I don't get all the questions that Eric did. And I'm happy to work with anybody on the term reasonable. So.
Hey, committee, any questions for Marley? Senator Close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this is an afterthought from Eric, Sharon. And if I miss it, my apologies. What are other states using as far as this? Do you see that reasonable term? I mean, is there anything someone else is doing, or?
Sure, appreciate the question, Senator. So every state, as far as I'm aware, all 56 insurance departments, and so that's the 50 states, DC, and the 5 territories, they charge or invoice the companies for the actual cost incurred by the department, including contracted services. I believe Kansas is the only state that has this cap for contracted services, any kind of services in general, but we wish to establish an overall cap, so that way, I'm not going to say sky's the limit on the cost of an examination, but sometimes they can vary over the course of the 3 to 5 year period. Not sure if I exactly answered your question, but and to further underscore the inclusion of reasonable, it's really just to provide a guardrail, but as I stated, we'll be sure to bring you more answers on that, and I don't think that's a hill that we would die on by any means.
Okay, thank you for the clarity.
Committee, have any other questions for Marley? Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Marley, and your group for presenting testimony today. You said, questions about reasonableness, and you're a practicing attorney as well, and so reasonableness and reasonable is used all the time in statute and in standards of review and things like that. Is that correct? And so it's not a new term for the law to be putting into statute. It's new to this particular statute, but do I have that right?
You would be the expert on that.
So. Oh, no, I don't profess to be.
I don't feel like I would be the expert on that to answer that question, but yes, the term reasonable has been used in case law and other things.
Right, and we have that in other statutes. I'm looking to research or the revisor. I mean, we use it's a term of art. It's a legal term that means something, so that it's not a new term we're inserting into Kansas law, is I guess what I'm getting at, right?
Eileen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Reasonableness, in my experience, and it's only been 10 years that I've been doing this, but reasonableness typically occurs in contracts, not necessarily in statute, where it becomes something like, the individual will exercise good faith, best efforts, or reasonable effort, or whatever it is. And as far as we can recall in law school, that's not a term that people like to use because, again, how can you measure best effort? How can you measure reasonableness? It's a very subjective term. My only thought to kind of adding additional guardrails around the word reasonableness in this statute would be maybe to have the ability for an insurer to challenge the reasonableness with the commissioner of whatever fee is being charged, and then have it be able to go through like an administrative process. But if the committee is sold on the word, that might be one way to fix it.
Thank you, and I just want to clarify a little bit, thinking through this, not only do we look at reasonable efforts to, correct a breach of a contract, but if you look in the criminal context, we have beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, that's the highest level of burden of proof that we have in the law, beyond a reasonable doubt. In the tort context, which is not contracts but is tort, has someone been negligent towards you, not contractually breached, but negligent towards you, one of the standards that we determine have you been negligent is, and I don't mean to be professing law here, but just kind of in my experience, is that what would the reasonable person have done? So there is a standard in law, what would the reasonable person have done under these same fact scenarios? So I would submit that the term reasonable is used in just about all areas of law. And I appreciate the effort of the proponents of this bill for putting some standard, some cap, some limit on what these charges might look like, and that word is reasonable because each investigation is different, but you just want to keep it within some limits, some scope, while you are able to thoroughly conduct the investigation, and not to overly talk about reasonableness, but just to try to be as clear as I can be when talking about it. So thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you, Marley.
Senator Pittman?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate those words from my colleague. I think I absolutely agree. We appreciate the guardrails, no doubt about it. It's just that I think that when we introduce inside of this kind of very, very detailed area, something that could be highly subjective, some firms might have different standards that might not fit the standard of a future commissioner who's decided that they want to come down on a couple of people. I mean, it just becomes a very much of, where's the line? And so I thought we could maybe, when we come up with statutes, we're putting numbers in here with tiered standards. Why not put some kind of a tiered standard or some process in there? And that's the only reason we question this. So, but I think it's a good effort and good intent, so I understand that too.
Committee, we got any other questions, comments? Senator Olson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was trying not to weigh in on this, but I do agree with Senator Pittman. I think, I applaud you for what you guys are trying to do. I think it'd be better if they worked on an amendment to try to tighten that language up, because I think it leaves it subject to, multiple lawyers' points of opinion. And, this is something that, somewhere down the line might end up in court because we really just didn't button the language. I think, I know what you're trying to do, but I just think you can dance all around that word. And so, I don't know. I think if you guys were smart, you would get together and tweak it a little more. And because I don't think you're there. I mean, that's just my opinion.
Any other comments or questions, committee? I notice Marley's back by the door trying to get out of here, so we have any other questions for Marley? Oh, okay. Any other questions for Marley? Thank you for your presentation. Okay, no other proponents at this point? Do we have any opponents at this point? Is there any neutral testimony that has been submitted at this time of the hearing? So, okay, then at that point, we will close this hearing. And I don't think you have a copy of the agenda in front of you. I had some reminders on mine I kind of wanted to go over. Yesterday was the last day for an individual to request bill drafts, so that's passed. Monday is the last day for a non-exempt committee to request bill drafts. Wednesday of next week, the 7th, is the last day for bill introductions by individuals. And Friday is the last day for non-exempt committee bill introductions. And then Tuesday, the 20th, is the last day for AM and PM committees to meet before turnaround on Friday, the 23rd. So just kind of as a review of what's hanging out there on the calendar. Is there any other business today before the committee? Okay, we're on call by the chairman for tomorrow, so I'm going to let you off tomorrow. So, and with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.